I pulled off the highway because my hands would not stop shaking. The breakup had ended hours earlier in a kitchen that smelled like burnt coffee, and I had driven without noticing towns or exits. By the time the mountains closed in and the road narrowed, my eyes burned and my thoughts looped. I saw a motel sign rise out of the dark, the kind with individual letters and a vacancy light that buzzed. I parked because I needed sleep more than I needed answers. The place sat in a shallow dip between trees. Wet leaves covered the edges of the lot. Rain had just passed through and left the air cold and metallic. The pavement shone under scattered lights. I remember the sound of water dripping from the eaves and the smell of damp pine. I checked in without thinking and carried my bag to a room near the end of the row. My door faced the parking lot. A single light pole stood near the middle, its bulb flickering in a tired rhythm. I noticed the man before I closed the door. He stood under that light, tall and straight, hands down at his sides. He wore dark clothes that swallowed the glow. I could not see his face clearly. The flicker cut his shape into pieces, then stitched it back together. I assumed he was another guest taking a break or smoking, though I did not see smoke. The lot was empty except for my car and a pickup near the office. The man did not move when my door shut. Inside, the room smelled of cleaner and old fabric. The heater rattled and then settled into a steady breath. I sat on the bed and listened to rain drip. I checked the clock on my phone. A little after 4. I lay back and stared at the ceiling, then rolled onto my side. After a few minutes, I got up to draw the curtains. The man was still there. He had not shifted his weight. His posture looked uncomfortable, like a person holding a pose. I watched for a full minute. The light blinked on and off. When it went dark, he vanished. When it returned, he was back in the same place. I told myself he would leave once the rain fully stopped. I pulled the curtains together and lay down again. Sleep came in short bursts. Each time I woke, the heater clicked or a car passed on the road above the trees. At some point, a sharp feeling pulled me awake. I sat up, heart racing, and checked the time. Closer to 5. The rain had started again, heavier now. I stood and parted the curtains. The man was closer. He stood several spaces nearer to my room, no longer under the pole. He faced the building. His head was angled slightly down, as if looking at the doors. The distance between us had shrunk, without any sign of movement. I searched the lot for signs of life. Nothing. The pickup near the office had not changed. The office lights were dark. I stayed by the window, breathing slowly. I watched for steps, a shift, and emotion. He remained fixed. The rain ran over him, tracing lines on his jacket. The flicker from the pole barely reached him now. I felt exposed standing there, so I stepped back and turned off the lamp. The room fell into gray shadow. I told myself he was moving when I was asleep. That explanation fit, even if it felt thin. People did strange things late at night. I sat on the bed and waited. The heater cycled. The rain drummed harder. Minutes stretched. I went back to the window. He was closer again. Now he stood near the curb in front of my room. His shoes were just visible. They were dark and slick with water. His shoulders were squared. He still faced the building. I leaned closer to the glass to see his face. The flicker from the pole caught the edge of his cheek once, then vanished. I could not make out features. The glass reflected my own eyes, wide and tired. Fear settled in my chest, heavy and cold. I locked the door, even though it already was. I pulled the curtains shut and sat on the floor with my back against the bed. I stayed there listening. No footsteps. No doors opening. Only rain and the heater. I dozed again, head against the mattress. I dreamed of standing in a lot under a light that would not stay on. When I woke, dawn had not arrived. The darkness had thinned. I checked the time. A little before 6. I stood and opened the curtains a final time. He was almost at my door. He stood at the edge of the concrete walk, a few feet from the threshold. The angle of his head had changed. He looked up now toward my window. The light pole flickered behind him, too far to light his face. I could see the outline of his jaw and the hollow under his cheekbone. He did not blink. He did not sway. I waited for him to reach for the handle. He did not. I waited for a knock. None came. The rain slowed and then stopped. The quiet felt pressed against my ears. I watched until the sky lightened and the shape of the mountains emerged. Birds started calling from the trees. The man remained in place. When the light pole went dark for the last time and stayed that way, I saw him clearly enough to notice his clothes were soaked and heavy. Water dripped from his sleeves. When the sun finally broke over the ridge, he was gone. I did not see him leave. One moment he stood there, and the next the space was empty. The air felt wrong, like a pressure change. I stood frozen, then stepped back. I waited several minutes before opening the door. The lot looked different in daylight. Puddles filled the low spots. Wet leaves stuck to the edges. The light pole leaned at an angle, bent downward toward the building, as if someone had put their weight on it. The metal near the base showed a fresh crease. The bulb hung crooked, still off. I walked the path from the pole to my door. The pavement was clean, washed by rain. There were no footprints, no scuffs, no marks that showed a person had crossed the open space. I checked the curb and the grass beyond. Mud clung to the edge, smooth and untouched. I felt a calm settle in, thin but real. The man had been there. He had moved. He had left. The lack of tracks made sense in a place like this. Rain erased things quickly. Asphalt did not hold prints. A person could move without sound if they wanted to. The bent pole told me something heavy had leaned on it, maybe climbed it, maybe pulled it down for shelter from the rain. That explanation fit better than any other. I packed my bag and loaded the car. I did not go to the office. I did not look around for cameras. I drove out as the mountains warmed and the fog lifted. On the road, I replayed the night and filed it away with other moments that taught me to trust patterns over comfort. I stopped once for coffee and kept going. Years later, I can still picture the way he closed the distance without showing how. I think about the places people can stand unseen, the gaps between moments when eyes close and open again. I think about how easy it is to become part of the background if you do not move. Nothing about that night requires ghosts or stories passed down. It requires a tired driver, a lonely motel, a man who knew how to wait, and a light that could not decide whether to stay on. I pulled off Interstate 40 because the road started bending in ways it never does. White lines doubled and slid apart. Headlights smeared into long streaks. I had been awake close to 20 hours, running on gas station coffee and the tight fear that comes when a parent is in a hospital bed. My sister had called earlier in the evening. Our dad had suffered a stroke that afternoon. He was stable but altered, the kind of word doctors use when they do not want to promise anything. I told her I would drive through the night from New Mexico and be there by morning. Somewhere in western Oklahoma, that promise became dangerous. The motel sat just beyond the exit ramp, back from the road, as if it had been pushed there and forgotten. The sign buzzed and cut in and out, several letters dead, so the name never appeared whole. The parking lot had cracks filled with dirt and weeds. For cars were parked far apart. No one moved. The office light was on, flat and yellow, the kind that makes skin look gray. Inside, the air smelled of old carpet cleaner and dust. The counter was worn down to the wood at the edge. A man stood behind it, older, with a posture that suggested he had been standing in that spot for years. He did not look surprised to see me. He slid a key across the counter without asking questions. The key was heavy brass with a white plastic tag stamped with the number 12. I wrote my name on a card because the pen was already there and the lines were already filled with other names in different handwriting. The man took the card and placed it face down without looking at it. He did not say anything. I took the key and walked back outside. The walk to the room felt longer than it should have. The building was one long row with doors facing the lot. Room numbers were faded. 12 was near the end, under a broken light that flickered with a slow rhythm. The door paint was chipped. The lock resisted before giving way. The room smelled like soap and warm air. The bedspread was pulled back. A suitcase sat open on the chair by the window, clothes folded with care, shirts stacked by color. A pair of shoes was placed side by side near the wall. The bathroom door was open. The mirror was fogged. Water still dripped in the shower, slow and steady, the drain catching each sound. I stood in the doorway and waited for someone to step out of the bathroom. No one did. The room was quiet except for the water. I backed out and locked the door again, checking the number twice. 12. My heart started racing in a way that had nothing to do with caffeine. I walked back to the office. The man behind the counter looked at me, as if I had returned an item that had never been sold. I explained what I had seen without raising my voice. He watched my face rather than listening. When I finished, he checked a ledger that sat open on the counter. The pages were thick and stained. He turned them slowly. He shook his head once. His expression did not change. He indicated that the room had not been assigned recently. He did not suggest another room. He did not apologize. He did not stand up. The exchange ended because there was nowhere for it to go. I walked back to the room with a sense of being followed, though I never heard footsteps. The lot looked the same. The broken light still flickered. I unlocked the door. The suitcase was gone. The clothes were gone. The shoes were gone. The bathroom was dry. The mirror was clear. The bed was made tight, corners tucked the way housekeeping does when they expect no one to sleep there. The smell of soap lingered, but had faded into the background smell of the room, old fabric and cleaner. I stood in the center and tried to explain it in a way that did not lead to panic. Someone had entered after I left. Someone had been moved. A mistake. Fatigue. I set my bag down and sat on the bed. My hands shook. I checked the locks on the bathroom window and the main door. Both held. I went to splash water on my face. When I leaned toward the sink, I noticed letters on the mirror. They were not carved or written in marker. They were traced in steam residue, thin lines where a finger had passed earlier, and the moisture had evaporated at a different rate. The letters spelled my full name. I stared until my eyes hurt. I wiped the mirror with my sleeve. The letters vanished. I stood there longer than necessary, breathing through my nose, counting tiles. I did not leave the room again. I pushed a chair against the door. I sat on the bed with my phone in my hand and watched the clock crawl. I did not sleep. Morning came with the sound of traffic. Sunlight showed every flaw. In daylight, the room looked ordinary. Cheap, tired, but ordinary. I packed and went to the office to check out. The man was in the same place. I slid the key across the counter. He placed it on a hook without looking. I asked for a receipt. He handed me one that listed the date, the room number, and my name printed at the top. I drove for another hour before pulling over at a rest stop. I needed to understand what had happened in a way that would let me keep driving. I went through it piece by piece. The suitcase and clothes were real. The warm shower was real. The name on the mirror had an explanation that did not require anything impossible. Steam writing lingers. It can reappear when humidity shifts. The question was how my name got there. The receipt provided the answer I did not want. The motel had my name because I had written it on the card. The card had not been thrown away. It had been placed face down on the counter. Anyone behind that counter could read it later. Anyone with access to the room could write it. The ledger said the room had not been rented recently. That did not mean no one had used it. It meant no one had paid for it. The half-abandoned lot, the few cars, the silence, all fit a place that cut corners. I imagined a system that relied on confusion and fatigue. A clerk who used an empty room for personal reasons. A traveler told to use a room that was not clean because it was not supposed to be used. A quick reset done after I left the first time. A name written on a mirror as a test or a joke or a warning. Something meant to unsettle a tired person who would leave and not cause trouble. No ghosts were needed. Only carelessness and a willingness to cross a line. The explanation did not make me feel better. It made me angry. It also made the world make sense again. People do strange things in quiet places at night. Records do not always match reality. Identity becomes a tool when someone else holds it. I threw the receipt away and washed my hands. I reached the hospital before noon. My dad was alive. He recognized me. He squeezed my hand. The motel faded into a story I told once, and then stopped telling. Years later, when I think about that night, what stays with me is not fear of the unknown. It is the certainty that exhaustion makes you easy to move, easy to confuse, easy to mark. I learned to stop driving when my vision doubles. I learned to trust daylight. I learned that rooms can be occupied even when the books say they are empty. The storm forced us off the highway without any sense of choice. One moment the road existed as a pale ribbon between walls of blowing snow, and the next it vanished into white. Headlights reflected back at us like we were driving into fog made of glass. The temperature gauge on the dash dropped fast. The gas light came on. We followed a dim exit sign that barely showed through the storm and crept down a frontage road that felt abandoned. The motel appeared suddenly, low and long, its sign buzzing weakly, half the letters dark. Snow had already buried the parking lines. Our tires cut fresh tracks that looked wrong the moment we stopped, like proof we should not have been there. Inside, the air smelled old and dry, like dust baked into carpet. The clerk barely looked up when he handed us a key. He said we were the only guests staying that night. I remember the certainty of it, the way it settled into my head as a fact that did not need checking. The lobby lights hummed. A small television behind the counter played silently. There were no other cars outside. That mattered to me more than it should have. Our room sat at the far end of the ground floor, facing the empty lot. The heater rattled when we turned it on, then settled into a low, uneven thump. The bathroom light flickered. The bedspread smelled faintly of bleach. Outside, the wind scraped snow along the walkway in dry sheets. We ate stale snacks from the car and lay down fully clothed, exhausted from the drive. The clock glowed red on the nightstand. The numbers burned into my eyes when I closed them. Sometime after midnight, the noises started. At first they fit into the idea of an old building reacting to weather. A door closing somewhere down the row. Pipes knocking. The heater clicking. Then came the sounds that did not belong to an empty place. A toilet flushing. Footsteps passing our door. A television turning on. Canned laughter rising and cutting off abruptly. The noises came in clusters, then stopped, then returned. Each time I told myself the same thing. That sound carried strangely in storms, that the clerk could be wrong, that maybe a trucker had pulled in late. I checked the clock. It was just after 2. The red numbers looked too sharp. I noticed details that should not have mattered, like a dark scuff on the wall near the door, and the way the curtain moved even though the window was closed. The sense of being observed crept in without a clear source. Not watched exactly, more like noticed. The hallway noise grew closer. A door opened 2 rooms down, then another. The sound of multiple televisions overlapped, laughter bleeding into each other until it turned into something flat and wrong. The heater kicked off. The room went quiet enough that my ears rang. Then footsteps stopped directly outside our door and stood there. No knock followed. The steps did not move on. They stayed until my chest tightened and I realized I had been holding my breath. I do not remember falling asleep, but I remember waking up. The room felt smaller. The air felt heavy, thick in my lungs. My head ached in a deep, dull way that made it hard to think. The clock read 3:07. The hallway was alive again. Doors opening and closing in no pattern. Toilets flushing in short bursts. A television playing low, the laugh track muffled like it was coming through a wall. I felt certain then that the clerk had lied or been mistaken. The certainty felt forced, like my mind was pushing it into place to avoid something else. Eli got up to check the vending machines near the ice dispenser. I watched him put on his boots, his movements stiff and careful. The door closed behind him with a soft click. The moment it shut, the hallway noise dropped out. The silence pressed hard against my ears. Minutes stretched without a sound. When he came back, his face looked wrong, pale under the harsh light, his eyes unfocused like he had just woken from a bad dream. He did not sit. He stood near the door, breathing fast, and stared at the wall above the heater. He lay down without taking his boots off. The noises did not come back right away. When they did, they sounded farther away, less specific, like echoes of echoes. I tried to sleep. My thoughts slipped and jumped. Images intruded without context. A hallway with identical doors. The feeling of standing too close to a wall. The texture of cheap wallpaper under my fingertips. I kept opening my eyes to check the room, to anchor myself to the bed, the nightstand, the red numbers. At some point the door opened. I am certain of that. I remember cold air touching my face, the sound of wind, the crunch of snow under boots. I remember standing in the hallway, though I do not remember getting there. The carpet felt damp through the soles of my shoes. The lights buzzed overhead. Several doors were open. Inside each room, a television played the same show, the same laugh track, perfectly out of sync. People stood in the hall facing the walls, spaced evenly, hands at their sides. They did not move. I did not see their faces. I woke up in bed with my heart racing and my mouth dry. The clock read 5:18. The heater had shut off completely. My head felt stuffed with cotton. Snowlight seeped through the curtain, turning the room gray. Everything felt wrong but solid, like the aftermath of a fever. Morning came without relief. The storm had passed, leaving the world buried and silent. Our car sat alone in the lot, half covered in snow. No new tracks showed besides ours. The clerk looked different in daylight, older, more tired. He acted surprised to see us. He said again that we were the only guests that night. He showed us the security monitor when we asked about the noise. The footage showed the hallway from multiple angles. Timestamps advanced steadily. On the screen, Eli and I walked the hall at least 4 times between 2 and 4 in the morning. Sometimes together, sometimes alone. We stopped in front of doors and stood there. Once, we stood facing the wall near the ice machine for several minutes without moving. No other people appeared on the footage. No doors opened except our own. I did not recognize the movements as mine, but the jacket was mine, the boots were mine. The way the figure paused, then turned, matched habits I knew too well. The clerk explained the plumbing noise as pressure changes from the cold. The televisions had been left on in empty rooms, a maintenance oversight. The heater in our room used an old gas unit. He mentioned it almost casually, said it had been acting up. We left as soon as the road cleared. The drive felt unreal, like waking life layered over something else. Later, a mechanic confirmed a small exhaust leak in the heater system. Carbon monoxide exposure fit the headache, the confusion, the memory gaps. Sleepwalking explained the footage. Stress and exhaustion filled in the rest. Every piece had a place. The explanation closed neatly like a box. Eli never talks about that night. When I tried once weeks later, his face closed off completely. He said he did not remember anything after lying down. I do remember, and I do not. The memories feel both fixed and unreliable, like photographs left in the sun. I accept the explanation because it works, because it has to. Still, when I think about the footage, about the way we stood facing the walls, I cannot shake the sense that whatever happened required both of us to believe it at the same time. I stopped because I could not drive any longer. The highway had flattened into a straight ribbon through palms and dark drainage canals, and my eyes kept burning from the glare of overhead lights and salt in the air. It was just after midnight in August, the kind of Florida night that presses close to the skin and never cools. I was moving south for work, my car packed tight with boxes, and my dog wedged into the back seat with her bed and a bag of food. I needed a shower, sleep, and a place where she could be walked without traffic. The motel sat just off the road, a low concrete strip with a glowing vacancy sign and rooms that opened directly to the parking lot. I pulled in without thinking too much about it. The brochure in the office showed a plain place. 2 floors, ice machine, laundry room, no mention of a pool. That stood out because nearly every place in that part of the state advertised one, even when it was little more than a shallow rectangle behind the building. I noticed the absence and felt relieved. Pools at night made me nervous, the way sound carries and the way water reflects light. I signed in, took the key, and parked near my room so I could unload a few essentials. My dog stayed alert, ears up, scanning the dark as she always did in unfamiliar places. Nothing about the motel felt wrong. It smelled of warm concrete and old air conditioning units. A few doors down, a television flickered blue through thin curtains. The room was clean in the way budget motels often are, scrubbed but worn. I let my dog out on her leash to relieve herself along the edge of the lot where weeds pushed through cracks. She finished quickly and pulled back toward the room, tail low, posture stiff. I chalked it up to the late hour and the heat. Inside, I fed her, filled her water bowl, and set my phone on the nightstand to charge. I planned to shower and sleep. When I stepped outside again to toss a bag of trash, I noticed a light behind the building. It was bright, steady, and white, not the yellow spill from a parking lot lamp. The motel backed up to what looked like a service area, a wide strip of asphalt beyond the rooms. The light seemed to come from farther back than that, from a space I had not seen when I arrived. Curiosity pulled me a few steps past the corner of the building. Behind the motel was a pool. It was not small. It sat in a cleared rectangle of ground, surrounded by chain-link fencing that reached above my head and curved inward at the top. The water was lit from below, a clean blue that made the surrounding darkness feel heavier by contrast. The surface was perfectly still. No leaves floated there. No insects skittered across. The concrete around it looked new, pale, with painted depth markers that were crisp and unchipped. A metal ladder gleamed at the shallow end. The fence gate was closed and secured with a simple latch. There were no chairs, no towels, no signs. Just the pool, lit and immaculate, as if it had been placed there for a photograph. I felt a moment of confusion rather than fear. I had looked at the brochure twice. I had chosen this place partly because it did not advertise a pool. I told myself the brochure was outdated or wrong. That happened often enough. I stepped closer to the fence. The hum of the underwater lights vibrated faintly through the air. That was when I noticed movement. Something shifted beneath the surface, not a splash or a ripple, but a slow passage through the light. It looked like the shadow of a person swimming laps, stretched and distorted by the water. Then another shape moved in the opposite direction. Neither surfaced. The water stayed smooth, the reflections unbroken. I waited for a head to break the surface, for a breath, for the slap of an arm. None came. My dog stiffened beside me. Her growl started low in her chest and built into a constant sound. She planted her feet and leaned back, pulling against the leash, eyes fixed on the water. I tried to turn her head away. She resisted, hackles raised. She had never reacted like that to a pool before. She loved water. We had lived near a lake. This was different. The shapes continued to move, passing through the lit water like darker currents. I told myself it was a trick of light, reflections from passing cars, the play of shadows from the fence. I stepped closer to see better. The smell hit me then, sharp and clean. Chlorine, strong enough to sting my nose. That made it real. Pools smell like that when they are freshly treated. I stood there longer than I should have. Time stretched. The night insects were quiet back there, as if the light pushed them away. My dog's growl never stopped. I felt watched without seeing anyone watching. I did not feel in danger in a direct way. I felt out of place, like I had stepped into an area that was not meant for guests. I pulled my dog back toward the room. She resisted until we turned the corner of the building. Then she surged forward, eager to put walls between herself and whatever was behind us. Inside, she paced and whined. She would not settle. I locked the door and checked the deadbolt twice. I showered quickly, keeping the curtain partly open, listening to the rush of water and the hum of the air conditioner. When I lay down, the smell of chlorine seemed to cling to me, even though I had not touched the pool. Sleep came in fragments. Every time I drifted off, I dreamed of light underwater and the pressure in my ears as if I were submerged. I woke before dawn with my dog pressed against my legs, trembling. The growling had stopped, replaced by a low whine that rose and fell with her breathing. The air in the room felt stale and heavy. When morning came, it came fast. Florida sun does that. I got up early, wanting to leave before the heat set in. I took my dog outside and walked her along the back of the building again, partly out of habit, partly because I needed to see the pool in daylight. I expected it to look ordinary then, to lose whatever hold it had on me. There was no pool. The space behind the motel was a stretch of cracked asphalt, uneven and patched, with tufts of grass pushing through seams. The ground sloped slightly toward a drainage ditch. There was no fence, no concrete, no ladder, no lights. The only sign that anything had been there at all was the smell. Chlorine hung in the air, faint but unmistakable, carried by the warmth of the rising sun. I stood there, turning in a slow circle. The area was too small for what I had seen the night before. The pool had been long, deep enough for lap swimming. There was no room for it here. I checked the angle of the building, the distance to the fence line. It did not add up. My dog sniffed the ground, uneasy, then pulled away, eager to return to the front of the motel. I finished packing and loaded the car. Before leaving, I walked back to the office to drop off the key. I glanced at the brochure rack again. No pool listed. I looked up the motel online on my phone while I waited for the receipt to print. The photos showed the front of the building, the rooms, the parking lot. No pool in any image. Reviews mentioned noise, thin walls, clean sheets. Nothing about swimming. As I drove away, the explanation came together, not all at once, but in pieces that fit when I let them. The motel sat near a seasonal workforce area. Temporary structures went up and came down overnight in places like that, especially in summer. An above-ground pool could be installed behind a building for a private group, fenced in, lit, used after hours, then drained and removed before inspections or complaints. The chlorine smell lingered because chemicals cling to porous surfaces. The figures under the water could have been maintenance hoses, vacuum heads, reflections from the fence, the way light bends and stretches anything moving below the surface. My dog's reaction made sense when I thought about the concentration of chemicals, the unfamiliar sounds, the hum of electrical equipment vibrating through the ground. Animals sense things we ignore. The part that stayed with me was not fear of what I could not explain. It was the certainty that I had seen something real that left no trace by morning. Places change faster than we expect, especially places built to be temporary. That night taught me how easily a clean, bright thing can appear and vanish, leaving only a smell and a memory that does not fit the space it came from. I drove south with the windows down, the chlorine fading from my senses, and did not stop again until daylight was high and the road felt solid under me. I went there because the highway closed behind me and the snow kept coming. I had planned a solo ski trip, 3 days of quiet and sore legs, but the storm arrived early and trapped me in a mountain town with one motel still lit. February 2014. Late night. The place sat off the road with a shallow parking lot already buried. I remember the sound of my boots on packed snow, and the way my breath scraped my throat from the cold. Inside smelled of wet carpet and disinfectant. My room was at the end of the row, ground floor, facing a dark slope of trees that rose close enough to block any view of town. The heater did not work. I noticed right away because the room never warmed. The wall unit hummed and clicked, then fell quiet. I checked the vents, the knob, the breaker panel by the door. Nothing changed. The air stayed thin and cold. I layered everything I had. Long underwear, ski socks, fleece jacket. I left my hat on. I lay down because there was nothing else to do. The bedspread was thin and smelled like old soap. The mattress dipped in the center and held me there. Above the bed was a rectangular ceiling vent, painted over so many times the slats looked swollen. I assumed it was part of the heating system. I put my hand up and felt warmth. It surprised me. The air came in slow pulses, not steady. It pushed down against my palm, paused, then pushed again. The warmth felt real enough to be comforting. I pulled the blankets up to my chin and let it blow over my face. I did not sleep. The air arrived in a pattern I could not ignore. It came in long draws, then short ones. Sometimes too close together, then a gap. Mechanical systems cycle, but they keep time. This did not. The pauses stretched and shrank. I lay there counting without meaning to. The warmth carried a faint smell, not dust, not oil. Something damp and human, like skin after being under a coat too long. My nose burned from the dry cold below the vent and the warm air above it. My eyes watered. Condensation formed on the ceiling around the vent. It started as a faint haze, then beads. The room was cold enough that my breath fogged, but the area above me stayed wet. I watched the moisture collect along the paint ridges. The beads slid and merged. They left trails that looked like smudges. When I shifted, the rhythm changed. When I lay still, it settled into something slower. My chest tightened from the cold and from the waiting. At some point I noticed the marks. The moisture had gathered into shapes that looked like fingerprints pressed into the ceiling. 5 ovals near one corner of the vent. Another set on the opposite side. They were not clear prints, but the spacing was wrong for drips. They had pads and gaps where skin would not touch. I sat up and the warmth increased, washing over my face and neck. The smell deepened. My scalp prickled. I wiped my eyes and told myself it was a leak and heat rising, air moving through old ductwork. The building groaned as the storm leaned into it. Wind makes patterns. Warm air expands and contracts. I stood on the bed and touched the ceiling. The paint was slick and cool around the vent, warmer inside the slats. I did not feel movement with my fingers, only the pressure of air. The vent rattled softly, not with a fan sound, but with the flecks of thin metal. I climbed down and sat on the edge of the mattress. My legs shook from fatigue and cold. I ate a protein bar and drank water. My stomach cramped. When I lay back down, the air shifted again. It seemed to seek my mouth and nose. I turned on my side and it followed, warming the back of my neck. I turned away and felt nothing. I turned back and it returned. The warmth felt intentional, even though I knew intention was my own fear looking for a shape. My skin crawled where the air touched it. I could feel the fine hairs on my arms lift and settle with each pulse. My heartbeat matched the rhythm for a few seconds, then fell out of sync and left me breathless. Sleep came in fragments. I dreamed of being underwater and trying to match my breath to something larger, so I would not be noticed. I woke with my jaw clenched and my tongue dry. The vent breathed. The condensation thickened. The fingerprints became clearer as the water traced the edges. I wiped my forehead and felt cold sweat. I kept my eyes on the ceiling because looking away made the sound louder. The sound was not a noise exactly. It was pressure and release, the room filling and emptying in my ears. I tried to block it by stuffing a towel into the vent. I dragged a chair over and climbed up. The towel stuck out, dampened the warmth, changed the pattern. For a few minutes the air pushed harder, then slowed. The towel fluttered and sagged. The smell grew stronger. I pulled the towel out and dropped back onto the bed. My hands were shaking. The vent returned to its earlier rhythm, as if relieved. By morning the storm eased. Pale light filtered through the thin curtains. The vent still breathed, but weaker. The condensation dried into faint stains that looked like hands pressed and removed. I packed quickly. My head ached from lack of sleep. My skin felt raw where the warm air had touched it all night, as if rubbed. When I stepped into the cold outside, the relief was immediate. The air was clean and sharp. My lungs expanded without effort. At the desk, I returned the key and paid for the night. The clerk glanced at the number on the tag and then at me. His face changed in a small way, the way people react to information they did not expect. He asked why I stayed in that room. He did not raise his voice. He did not smile. He looked tired. I told him the roads were closed. He nodded and said nothing more. On the drive out, with daylight on the mountains, the explanation settled. The motel sat against a slope. Snow piled high on one side and blocked exterior vents. Warm air from other rooms and from the laundry room rose through the building and found the only open path. The ceiling cavity above my bed connected to a vertical chase that ran up through the roof. Wind over the peak created pressure changes that pulled and pushed air through the opening. The timing varied with gusts and temperature. The warmth came from trapped air heated by the building, carrying smells from rooms above and below. The fingerprints were condensation shaped by uneven paint and airflow, guided by oils left from years of maintenance hands pressing the vent frame during repairs. The towel changed the pressure and forced the air to find resistance, increasing the smell and the push. All of it made sense in the clear morning. Old buildings breathe. They always have. Still, when I reached a town with an open cafe and warmth that did not move, my hands would not stop shaking. I kept my eyes on the ceiling for the rest of the day, measuring the air, listening for patterns, waiting for it to press back. I checked into the motel just after midnight, exhausted in the dull, heavy way that comes from too many miles and a reason for travel that never lets your shoulders relax. I had driven down from San Antonio after the funeral ran long, after the final hugs and the careful folding of programs and the quiet drive back to my car. I needed somewhere cheap, close to the highway, somewhere I could sleep for a few hours before finishing the drive at sunrise. The border town motel was the kind of place you pick without thinking. One story, exterior doors, faded paint, a blinking vacancy sign that looked like it had been blinking for years. The room smelled like disinfectant and old carpet. Not dirty, just tired. The air conditioner rattled and then settled into a steady hum. I set my suit jacket on the chair, kicked off my shoes, and lay down without turning on the television. My phone said 1:03 a.m. I closed my eyes and waited for sleep to take me. Sometime later, I heard wheels. At first I thought it was a car passing slowly outside, tires rolling over gravel. Then the sound came again, closer, softer, with a faint rattle underneath. It was the sound of a cart being pushed across concrete. I opened my eyes and stared at the ceiling. The air conditioner hummed. The sound paused, then rolled again, stopping just outside my door. I lay still. Motels have noise. Ice machines. Doors. Early departures. I told myself that and stayed in bed. A minute passed. Then another. The wheels rolled back the other way, slow, careful, stopping again. No voices. No footsteps. Just the cart. I checked the time. 2:19 a.m. The cart rolled once more a few feet, then stopped. I waited for the sound of it moving away. It did not come. Eventually my body sank back into sleep, the sound blending into the hum of the air conditioner. I woke again near dawn, not because of noise but because of the pale light leaking through the curtains. The room felt colder. I sat up and rubbed my face. For a moment I forgot about the sound from the night before. Then I swung my legs off the bed and noticed the shadow under the door. I opened it. A maid cart sat directly outside my room. It was angled slightly, blocking part of the walkway. White towels stacked unevenly. A yellow mop bucket hanging from the side. Cleaning supplies lined up in plastic holders. Nothing unusual, except that it was there, inches from my door, as if it had been left in the middle of a task. I stepped out and looked down the walkway. No one. The parking lot was empty except for my car and a pickup near the office. The sun was just coming up, the sky washed out and pale. I looked at the cart again. The metal frame was scuffed. The rubber wheels were dark with grime. I reached down without thinking and touched one of them. It was warm. Not sun warm. The cart sat in shade. The warmth felt recent, like something that had been moving not long ago. I pulled my hand back and stood there longer than made sense, staring at a cleaning cart as if it might explain itself. I checked out early. I did not mention the cart. I drove the rest of the way home and spent the day dealing with paperwork and phone calls and the dull work that follows a death. By the afternoon, the motel felt distant. The cart became a strange detail I told myself I would forget. I did not. A week later, I found myself thinking about the sound again. The timing. The way it had stopped directly outside my door. I travel often for work and for family. I have stayed in worse places. Nothing like that had stuck with me before. 2 months later, I was back on the same highway for another trip, and, against my better judgment, I stopped at the same motel. It was late. The vacancy sign still blinked. The price was still cheap. I told myself that familiarity would settle the lingering unease. I got the same wing. Different room, a few doors down. The night passed quietly until the sound returned. Wheels. Slow. Careful. Rolling back and forth. I checked the time. 2:17 a.m. The sound stopped outside my door. I did not open it this time. I lay still and listened. The cart shifted slightly, metal tapping concrete, then went still. No footsteps. No breathing. Nothing that suggested a person was there. In the morning, the cart was gone. I did not check out early. I waited until the office opened. I walked up and asked, casually, about overnight cleaning schedules. The clerk gave me a blank look and said housekeeping started at 8. There was no overnight staff assigned to that wing. I nodded and left. That should have been the end of it. It was not. Over the next year, I stayed at that motel 4 more times, always for the same reason. Travel that required a cheap stop near the border. I asked for different rooms, different sides of the building. It did not matter. Every time, at 2:17 a.m., the sound came. Every time, the cart stopped outside my door. Sometimes it stayed until morning. Sometimes it vanished before sunrise. When it stayed, the wheels were always warm. On my last stay, curiosity overrode caution. I went to the office in the morning and asked about security footage. I expected resistance. Instead, the clerk hesitated, then pulled up the camera feed without comment. The monitor showed the walkway outside my room. At 2:17 a.m., exactly, the cart rolled into frame from the far end of the building. No person appeared with it. It moved on its own, steady, stopping precisely outside my door. It stayed there until 5:42 a.m., then rolled back out of frame. The clerk scrolled back through previous nights. Different dates, different months, the same timestamp, the same cart. Always the same stopping point. Always that spot, regardless of which room I had occupied. I asked about maintenance logs, about assigned cleaning zones, about anything that would make the pattern make sense. The answers were vague and practiced. Equipment sometimes got moved. Old buildings had quirks. Cameras glitched. No one was assigned to that wing overnight. I left and did not plan to return. Weeks later, I received a call from the motel manager. They said they were replacing the camera system and had noticed something odd in the archived footage. They wanted to know if I had ever experienced anything unusual during my stays. I told them everything, calmly, without embellishment. The explanation came slowly, through paperwork and records and the kind of truth that emerges when routine is examined too closely. Years earlier, the motel had contracted an overnight cleaner to work that wing exclusively. He worked alone. He used that cart. He had a medical episode on shift and collapsed near my room. He was found hours later. The motel quietly eliminated overnight cleaning. The cart was never officially decommissioned. It was stored at the end of the wing, near a slight slope in the concrete walkway. Every night, when the temperature dropped and the metal frame contracted, the cart's brake released. Gravity did the rest. It rolled until it hit the shallow dip in front of that door. The same door, the one closest to where he had fallen. The warmth came from friction. The timing matched the nightly temperature shift. The cameras recorded it because they were motion activated. No one noticed because no one checked. The routine had erased the anomaly. The cart was not assigned. The wing was unused overnight. Guests came and went. Complaints were rare. Patterns hid in plain sight. They fixed it by removing the cart and resurfacing the walkway. The footage stopped showing movement. I have not stayed there again. What stays with me is not fear. It is the image of that cart stopping exactly where it always stopped, night after night, month after month, because no one thought to ask why. The sound of wheels in the dark. The warmth under my fingers. The way a place can keep doing the same thing forever when no one is watching closely enough to interrupt it. I pulled into the motel just before midnight because the temperature needle on my dash had climbed past the last mark and stayed there. The heat had been relentless since mid-afternoon, a flat white glare that turned the road into a mirror. When steam rolled out from under the hood at a stoplight, I shut the engine down and coasted into the first place I saw with a vacancy sign. The town had no clear name on any sign I passed. It sat low and wide in the desert, a cluster of sodium lights and dust. The building was one long hallway wrapped around a parking lot. Stucco walls held the day's heat like a kiln. The air smelled of hot dust, damp concrete, and mildew that never quite dried. I carried a small bag and left everything else in the car. The hallway lights buzzed. Each door had a fan of scratches around the handle, shallow grooves cut into the paint, layered and old. They looked like damage from keys or rings, but the patterns climbed up and down, not random. I noticed them without stopping, the way you notice something off and keep moving because stopping feels worse. My room sat near the end. The ice machine stood against the far wall, a beige box under a flickering tube light. It was running when I walked past. The sound did not click or hum. It dragged air in and pushed it out with a wet, breathy pull, like a chest working too hard. The noise rose and fell, a slow intake, a shudder, then release. It felt close to an animal sound without being one. I told myself machines can sound wrong when they are old, and the heat is wrong. Inside the room, the air conditioner rattled and pushed warm air before it caught and cooled. The carpet smelled damp. I set my bag down and sat on the edge of the bed, listening. The ice machine's sound threaded through the wall. Each cycle ended with a hollow thump that vibrated the floor. The hallway quieted after a while. No voices, no doors, just the machine breathing and the AC trying to keep up. Around midnight, footsteps passed my door. They were heavy and uneven, one step dragging, the other landing flat. The pace was slow. The steps did not stop at my door or any door. They went past, then returned, then passed again. I counted 3 passes before I stood and pressed my eye to the peephole. The hallway looked empty. The light at the far end flickered. The carpet fibers along the baseboard bent and stayed bent, then slowly lifted, as if something tall brushed past them without a body I could see. The air moved, a soft pressure change that cooled my face. I stepped back and waited. The steps came again, closer this time, slow and heavy. The sound had weight, like something carrying more mass than a person. The ice machine inhaled at the same time, the 2 rhythms lining up until my pulse followed them. I did not hear breathing outside my door. I did not hear keys or carts. The steps went by and faded toward the stairwell. I did not sleep. I lay on the bed with the lights off and listened. The ice machine ran for long stretches, then paused, then started again. When it paused, the hallway felt larger, as if the walls relaxed. During one pause, the steps returned. They stopped outside my door. The carpet pressed down in 2 long arcs, not round like shoes, more like weight spread across a longer shape. The peephole showed nothing. The air shifted again. After a moment that stretched, the weight lifted and moved on. The machine started again, louder, breathier, the thump at the end of the cycle hitting harder. Near dawn, the hallway went quiet. The machine shut down and stayed silent. I slept in short bursts and woke with the light, a thin stripe under the curtains. The smell of dust returned with the heat. I packed and stepped outside. My car sat where I left it. The hood had dents near the edge, 3 shallow depressions shaped like curved hooks. The paint had spidered around them. They were not random. They lined up as if something had gripped and pulled. No paw prints showed on the asphalt. The lot had been swept or the wind had scoured it overnight. I walked back inside and followed the hallway to the ice machine. In daylight, the box looked worse. The vent grill was bent inward. The drain pan beneath held cloudy water with hair and grit floating in it. The machine was off. The floor around it was scuffed, long marks that ran parallel to the wall. The scratches on the doors looked newer close to this end of the hall. The paint still flaked at the edges. At the stairwell, I noticed a maintenance cart parked just out of sight, the kind with large rubber wheels. One wheel had a chunk missing from the tread, leaving a flat that would land unevenly. The cart was tall, taller than a person when stacked with boxes and folded linens. If it rolled past a door, it would bend carpet fibers and move air. If someone pushed it slowly, injured or tired, the steps would drag. The cart smelled of mildew and metal. Outside, behind the building, the desert opened into scrub and rock. A chain-link fence leaned where something heavy had pressed against it. Beyond the fence, the ground showed tracks pressed deep and smeared by wind, not clear paws, more like hooves with a split shape. Feral hogs run in that part of the desert, displaced from ranch land, big and aggressive, smart enough to seek water and shade. They scratch and bite metal when they smell cold or food. They stand tall when they rear, high enough to brush a door handle. I circled back to my car and opened the hood. The radiator hose had split. The fan shroud had hair caught in it, coarse and dark. The dents lined up with the edge where an animal might climb to reach a cool surface. At night, the ice machine would draw water and vent heat, a lure. The sound, distorted by the hallway and the failing compressor, could pass for breath. The machine's thump could match a heavy body shifting its weight. A hog pushing a maintenance cart would make slow, uneven steps. The cart's height would bend fibers. The peephole would show nothing, because there was nothing upright to see. I drove away after a toe and a patch, windows down, heat already building. The motel shrank in the mirror, a low line against the light. I did not look back again. The dents stayed on the hood for years, shallow reminders of a night when sound and isolation did the work that eyes could not. I was only there because the weather shut everything down. The conference had already been scaled back, then canceled outright when the snow started stacking faster than the plows could clear it. Flights were grounded. Roads closed in sections. The motel was not a choice. It was the only building with a vacancy sign still lit along that stretch of highway. I remember pulling in just after midnight, snow blowing sideways, the lot empty except for my rental car and a plow parked crooked near the dumpsters. The building was long and low, 2 floors, exterior doors. The kind of place where sound travels through walls because nothing inside is sealed properly. My room was on the 2nd floor, near the far end. The clerk barely looked up when he handed me the key card. The lobby smelled like burned coffee and wet carpet. No other guests passed through while I was there. Inside the room, everything felt thin. The walls, the door, the air. I could hear the wind scrape the siding. The heater rattled when it kicked on, then settled into a low mechanical breath. I unpacked enough to sleep, checked my phone for updates, and set an alarm I did not expect to need. The snow kept falling. I lay on the bed fully dressed for a long time before I turned off the lamp. I woke up already alert, like my body had been nudged awake before my mind caught up. The room was dark except for the orange light bleeding through the curtains from the parking lot. The heater had shut off. The silence felt deliberate. Then the knocking started. 3 taps. Slow, evenly spaced. Not loud. Close enough that I could feel it through the mattress frame. It came from the door. I did not move at first. I waited for a hallway sound to follow it, footsteps, another door opening, anything that would give context. Nothing came. The wind outside had died down. The building had that hollow stillness that happens late at night when machines cycle off together. The knocking came again. Same pattern. Same pressure. Not aggressive. Not hesitant. After the 2nd set, I heard the voice. It was not muffled. It was not distant. It sounded like it was coming through the door the way sound does when you are standing close to someone on the other side of a thin wall. The tone was neutral, almost tired. It said that it was me and that I should open the door. It was my voice. Not similar. Not close. Exact. The pitch, the slight rasp from dry winter air, the shallow inhale I tend to take before speaking when I am unsure. Even the pacing matched. The way I speak when I am trying to sound calm while my heart is moving too fast. I sat up so quickly the mattress creaked. I listened again, waiting for the distortion that would tell me it was a recording or a drunk person mocking me, or my own head filling in gaps. The breathing on the other side of the door matched the rhythm of my own chest. When I held my breath, it paused. When I exhaled, it followed a half-second later. I did not answer. I did not speak at all. I stayed still and let my body slow down. I pressed my bare feet against the cold carpet to anchor myself in the room. The knocking resumed. 3 taps. Same spacing. Same place on the door, just above the handle. The voice returned. Same words. Same cadence. I stood and moved toward the door without thinking, then stopped halfway. The peephole was dark. No shadow passed under the door. The hallway light should have cast something, even in a storm. There was nothing. I checked my phone. No missed calls. No alerts. The time read 3:32 a.m. The heater kicked on suddenly, loud in the silence, and I flinched. The voice stopped. The knocking stopped. For a few seconds there was only the fan pushing warm air through the vent. I stayed where I was, one hand on the desk, the other hovering near the deadbolt. My reflection in the mirror looked wrong in the low light. Pale. Eyes too open. My mouth was hanging slightly open in the same shape the voice had used. Another set of taps landed on the door, harder this time, like the knuckles had adjusted their pressure. The sound carried through the frame and into the walls. The voice came again, closer now, as if the person had leaned in. I backed away until my calves hit the edge of the bed. I sat down hard and wrapped my arms around myself to keep from shaking. I forced myself to listen critically, to break it down into parts. Air movement, vibration, direction. The voice did not echo the way hallway noise usually does. It sounded contained, almost insulated. The tone stayed level. No frustration, no change in volume, just repetition. I crawled across the bed and pressed my ear to the wall that shared the door frame. The sound traveled through the structure more than through the air. I could feel it in the drywall. The knock had a dull center, like it was hitting something softer than wood. Minutes stretched. The pattern never changed. 3 taps. Pause. The voice. Pause. Again. I checked the time repeatedly. The minutes advanced. My phone battery dropped faster than it should have in the cold room. I turned on the bathroom light to add another source of illumination. The mirror caught it and threw my reflection back at me from a different angle. I avoided looking at it. At some point, I realized the breathing I was hearing was no longer synced to mine. It lagged too much. Then it sped up. Then it stopped entirely while the voice continued. That broke whatever hold it had on me. I pulled the desk chair against the door and wedged it under the handle. I locked the deadbolt again, even though it was already engaged. The knocking continued. No attempt was made to open the door. No handle rattled. No key card beeped. Just the taps, steady as a metronome. Hours passed like that. I sat on the floor with my back against the bed, wrapped in the motel blanket, listening. The heater cycled on and off. The pipes knocked somewhere above me. Once, tires passed slowly in the lot, chains clinking, and the voice paused until the sound faded. The sky outside lightened almost imperceptibly. The orange glow turned gray. The knocking stopped just before sunrise. No final sound. No retreating footsteps. Just absence. I waited another full hour before I moved the chair and opened the door. The hallway was empty. The carpet showed no fresh tracks. Snow had blown in near the stairwell, but not near my room. The air smelled clean, like cold and disinfectant. The door across from mine was a blank wall. No room number. No door seam. Just painted concrete and a fire extinguisher cabinet mounted where a door should have been. I walked the length of the building. My room was the last numbered unit on that side. Past it was only wall until the emergency exit. On the first floor, the layout was the same. At the front desk, the clerk from the night before was gone. A different man stood behind the counter, scrolling on his phone. I asked about the room next to mine. He pulled up the floor plan on the computer without comment. There was no room next to mine. The space was listed as a maintenance buffer, a utility chase, pipes, wiring, access panels. No entry from the hallway. No occupancy ever logged. The clerk said it was common in older buildings to leave gaps between units for insulation and repairs. He said sound could travel strangely through those spaces. I asked if anyone had reported knocking during the night. He shook his head. I asked if anyone else was checked in on that wing. He said only me. I checked out early and drove until the roads opened. I slept in a rest stop with the seat reclined and the radio on low, anything to keep my own thoughts from filling the silence. Weeks later, after the snow melted and my routine settled back into place, I requested my stay record out of habit, more to reassure myself than anything else. The receipt showed my room number. The time stamps matched my memory. No adjacent unit listed. No notes. No incidents. I have since learned how easily sound can be manipulated by structure. How vents and hollow spaces can shape airflow into something that feels intentional. How the human brain fills gaps with patterns it recognizes best. I understand how my own voice, recorded or mimicked or reflected, could have been distorted by panic and fatigue into something that felt external. What I cannot dismiss is the precision, the timing, the way it waited, the way it stopped when daylight came, the way the space next to me was empty by design, a place meant to carry noise without being seen. I do not stay in roadside motels anymore. When I hear my own voice unexpectedly, even on a recording I know I made, my chest tightens before my mind catches up. I sleep with lights on when storms close roads. I keep furniture away from doors. I did not open the door that night. Whatever was using my voice never tried to make me. That is the part that stays with me. It did not need force. It only needed me to believe I was hearing myself. I remember the exact smell of the motel office because it was the first thing that made me uneasy. Not fear, just discomfort. Warm disinfectant layered over salt air, like something trying to cover something else. It was June 2020, close to 11 at night, and the coastal fog had already rolled in thick enough to soften the parking lot lights. We had driven for hours after the beach, hair still damp, skin tight with dried salt, both of us exhausted in that pleasant way that usually comes at the end of a good day. We were laughing when we walked up to the office door, our sandals slapping against the concrete in uneven rhythm. We walked in together. I am certain of that. I can still picture it without effort. The glass door swung closed behind us and latched. The room was narrow, with a low counter and a plexiglass barrier bolted to the top. There was a rack of postcards near the door and a faded map of the coastline taped to the wall. I stood slightly to the left. She stood closer to the counter, leaning forward with her elbows on the edge, still scrolling through her phone. I remember her phone case clearly. Pale blue, scuffed at the corners, a crack running diagonally across the back. The clerk looked at the screen, then at me, then back at the screen. He slid a single key card across the counter and angled it toward my side. His eyes stayed on the monitor. His posture suggested routine, the kind that comes from long shifts and little sleep. I laughed automatically, already turning my head toward my friend to make a joke about being mistaken for a solo traveler. The laugh stopped halfway out of my mouth. She was no longer next to me. At first it did not feel strange. It felt like a timing issue, like she had stepped back to look at the brochures or had gone outside to grab something from the car. I took the key, thanked the clerk with a nod, and stepped aside to wait. I checked my phone. No new messages. I stood there for a few seconds, then a few more. The fog pressed against the glass door, blurring the shapes of parked cars. I pushed the door open and looked out. The lot was empty except for our car and a pickup truck parked 2 rows over. The air was cold enough to make my skin prickle. I went back inside and waited again. Still nothing. I walked out to the car and opened the trunk, expecting to see her rummaging through our bags. The trunk was closed. The car was locked. Her sandals were not on the ground. The fog swallowed sound, making the whole place feel muted, padded. I went back to the office and asked, without speaking, by pointing to the counter and gesturing toward the door. The clerk shook his head and tapped the screen. I felt embarrassed for being confused. I took the key and went to the room. The room was on the first floor, facing the ocean side, though the ocean itself was invisible behind the fog. The door opened with a heavy click. The lights came on in a slow flicker. The room smelled like damp carpet and industrial cleaner. 2 beds, beige walls, a small table under the window. Her bag was on the bed closest to the bathroom, unzipped, her clothes half folded inside, like she had already started unpacking. Her phone was on the other bed, face down, exactly where someone would set it after dropping keys or sunglasses. I stood still, hands still on the door, listening. The room was silent except for the low hum of the air unit. I picked up her phone. It was unlocked. The screen lit my face with missed notifications, none of them recent. I checked the bathroom. Empty. The shower was dry. Her toothbrush was still sealed in plastic on the counter. I sat on the edge of the bed and waited. Minutes passed without shape. I checked the hallway. I walked the length of the building. I looked near the ice machine. I went back to the office. I pointed again. The clerk's expression shifted, not to concern but to confusion. He turned the monitor toward me. There was 1 name on the reservation. Mine. 1 key issued. 1 check-in time. I felt a slow tightening in my chest that had nothing to do with panic and everything to do with recognition. Something had already gone wrong, and the shape of it was fixed. I returned to the room and began moving through it carefully, touching objects as if that would anchor them. Her jacket hung over the chair. Her wallet was in the outer pocket of her bag. Her shoes were lined up neatly by the bed. The kind of order that only happens when someone believes they will be back in minutes. I tried calling her phone from mine while holding it in my other hand. No vibration. No sound. It did not ring. It did not go to voicemail. It did nothing at all. Sometime after midnight, I drove to the front of the property and parked directly under the office light. I waited there, watching the door, convinced she would walk out at any moment, annoyed at me for making it a problem. The fog thickened. Droplets formed on the windshield. The ocean air crept into the car through the vents. The light buzzed overhead. By morning, the motel had a different tone. Sunlight revealed peeling paint, warped railings, stains on the walkway that looked older in daylight. Guests moved in and out of rooms carrying towels and coffee cups. The office was brighter, the disinfectant smell sharper. I tried again. Forms were printed. Screens were checked. The clerk from the night before was gone. The new one looked at me with the careful politeness reserved for inconveniences. There was no footage of her entering the office. The camera covered the counter and the door. The timestamp showed me walking in alone, standing alone, taking the key alone, leaving alone. No gap. No shadow behind me. No second shape following. I contacted local authorities. Statements were taken. I repeated myself until the words lost weight. The phrase "we walked in together" stopped sounding like truth and started sounding like insistence. Her name produced nothing. No record of a booking. No credit card authorization. No signature. No digital trace of her presence on the property. Her belongings stayed in the room for 2 nights while paperwork moved slowly. Each hour made them feel less like proof and more like leftovers. I touched her jacket once and felt nothing but fabric. Her phone was eventually taken, bagged, labeled. The room was cleaned while I sat in the parking lot, watching a housekeeper carry out trash bags that I knew did not contain her. Weeks later, after returning home, I received copies of reports, pages filled with boxes and check marks. She existed everywhere except where she had last been with me. Her family searched. I answered questions. The story never changed, but it lost credibility with repetition. Bureaucracy does not respond to certainty. It responds to records. The motel closed temporarily later that year. Renovation, according to a notice posted online. The listing photos showed the same beige walls, the same beds, new paint layered over old shapes. I recognized the room instantly. There was no revelation, no hidden crime, no discovered error. The conclusion was simple and complete. She disappeared between the parking lot and the counter, and the systems designed to record human presence failed to register her at all. What remained were objects, memory, and a single key issued to a person who was suddenly alone. I still avoid motels, not because I expect something to happen, but because I know how easily nothing can. I know how a person can vanish without force, without noise, without witnesses, and leave behind a world that continues to function as if that absence were always part of the plan.